Coming up in this episode.
One, I didn't even know my dad was my dad until I was like 7 or 8 years old. Not allowed to talk to my mom. And I spent my entire adolescence and teenage years being a top chess player who traveled the world that many saw as one of the best young talents in the country, but actually an orphan kid in the middle of a cult who had been taken away from his mom.
You are now listening to the Here for the Truth podcast, hosted by Joel Rafidi and Yerasimos.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Here for the Truth podcast. I'm Joel Rafidi. Got my co-host Yerasimos with me as always. Thank you for carving time out of your life to spend the next 90 minutes with us, or more actually, this conversation. It's quite an incredible one. All I have to say is really move in silence. Only speak when it's time to say checkmate.
There's just something about that word. Like just checkmate. Like it's done. You've lost. I won. It's over. There's nothing you can do.
Bro, a well-placed pawn is more powerful than the king.
Are you just taking these quotes off the internet right now?
Yes. Guys, we just wrapped up an incredible conversation, which isn't what you think it's going to be. Yes, Denny Rensch is an incredible businessman. He's a co-founder of chess.com. He's helped co-build an incredible organization and has advanced the game of chess in immeasurable ways. Yet, this is deep. This is metaphorical. This is right at the heart of what it means to be human, to have experiences, and to have life unfold in unexpected ways. And just really so much at the heart of what Here for the Truth is about in terms of grappling with complexity, embracing nuance, realizing that pain, trauma, our conditioning, all these things are real experiences which ultimately do have to be grappled with. And, I'm just really blown away and mind boggled at Denny's openness and his articulation when it comes to his personal story here.
Yeah, man, I totally agree. Obviously, you and I both love the game of chess, even though we haven't really played it much in a while. Excited for our audience to listen to his story, and it's just incredible.
Yeah, for sure. We'll keep this one brief because it is a longer episode. But if you resonate with us, you resonate with our message, hereforthetruth.com/FOTT, and you can join our you can join our membership community. It gets to hang out, kick it, get 6 or 7 calls a month with us, and just be inspired by incredible human beings who also resonate around this message, what we're putting out here. Hereforthetruth.com/FOTT. Please enjoy Denny Rensch. Denny Rensch is an international chess master, published author, and chief chess officer at chess.com. After a successful scholastic chess career, Denny joined chess.com as a co-founder in 2009. He directs the company's content, media partnerships, and professional chess events. He's an accomplished commentator and broadcaster, which he used to establish chess.com's streaming and creator programs. He has channeled his lifelong passion for playing and teaching chess to advance chess.com's mission of growing the game and helping people enjoy their lives through chess. With over 225 million registered users, chess.com is the leading platform for playing and learning chess. Denny, welcome to Here for the Truth, man.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm grateful to be here.
Nah,
you caught me right as I was taking a sip of coffee. Sorry for that.
That's all right. Pleasure's all ours, man. One way we always like to kick off these podcasts with the first-time guests is we really kind of want to get deep and extrapolate on your personal hero's journey a little bit. So wherever you feel called to dive in on some of like the major catalyzing rites of passage in your life that led you down this path of being, I guess, so devoted and such an advocate to the game of chess.
Yeah, well, big question. I will try to I will try to maybe not make it too long of an answer, but
you also did write a book. You did write a book about this too, so people can get that book after this.
But we're not here to promote the book. We're here to have good conversation, and I would say that the book does have a lot that's I'll start with the phrase TLDR. Too long, didn't read my memoir. Here's the version of that answer, which is I learned to play chess when I was 9. But the unique part of my story and the reason I wrote a book, or at least I guess the reason I was asked to write a book, was because if we go backwards to forwards, co-founder of chess.com, a guy who oversees in many ways the growth of the global chess community, at least as it's been in the last couple decades, as there's been a digital revolution, there's been just a massive, I think we have changed people's expectations for what chess can be in the modern era. It is played more globally than people probably ever thought it could be. And one of the guys who was a big part of that, I guess myself, is only there because he learned to play chess while being raised in a cult, and he was taken away from his mom by a cult leader who was chess obsessed. And ultimately that path, which as weird as that sounds, probably destroyed my chess playing career, but also put me on a path where I was right where I needed to be as the internet, as we know it, was happening, right? And so sort of picking up the pieces of my life at the time, and my very young and barely held together marriage, and the remnants of a spiritual collective that was sort of imploding from within. I was lucky enough to pivot the idea of being a chess player into being a chess businessman. And so, again, those are like the really high level beats that, we can dive into any of them. I know that is kind of a thing that sounds like a movie. And that's why I was lucky enough that Hachette was like, hey, we're going to write you a check to tell your story, because it kind of writes itself when you say, wait a second, the guy who's leading the chess world is only there because he was abducted and taken away from his mom by a chess obsessed cult leader. Where do I sign up? And that is literally my story. So
yeah,
crazy as it sounds.
I'd love to double click and zoom in on that story, man, if you feel cool, especially regarding, this kind of cult that you were raised in, and some of the more nuances around what that experience was like.
Yeah. So the next questions come, well, how could something like that happen? How could you be taken away from your mom? What sort of justifies that action? And what is sort of the framework required for such a play to take place, right? And I'm glad you asked that, because one of the things that, as I explained in the book, but also have been explaining, I think, in even more detail, going well past whatever I was able to get within the word count of the book, the unique belief system that was the Church of Immortal Consciousness. So that was the name of the Church of Immortal Consciousness, had a lot of spiritual underpinnings that, before we get into how those underpinnings may have been weaponized or not used appropriately, given that I have come to name it as a cult, which took me many, many years by itself. And anyone who was ever raised in a cult will know what I'm talking about, that this isn't something you just wake up one day and realize, like, oh, this has been a cult the whole time, and all of these things really didn't make sense, and this behavior was never okay. That's really not how it goes, or at least that wasn't my experience. And so to get into what the Church of Immortal Consciousness believed in and what sort of seeds had to be planted to allow that to go down, here's what I would say. The Church of Immortal Consciousness fundamentally believed that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, not physical beings trying to remember that we have a soul. Sounds pretty good, right? Nothing too, out there in terms of, at least what I would say in terms of the idea that, there maybe is life after death, maybe consciousness is fundamental, whatever it is you want to go into, the idea that you have a soul, or that maybe you actually are a spiritual being first and foremost. Nothing to, at least not, it sounds pretty benign. Then what ends up happening from there is you start to get into some of the specifics of the teaching. So if we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, then fundamentally biology and the embodiment you have chosen is more temporary than your ultimate self, right? So now you're in a belief system where we practice this and believe that in general, we were here to learn lessons from others. Everyone to some degree is a mirror and or reflection, or call them some sort of tiny Buddha or Christ, handpicked by you as the creator of the universe to become the best version of yourself. And that when you are embracing that the world is sort of a play and that your spiritual being is here for some sort of bigger purpose, to not just to learn lessons, but to maybe achieve a purpose. Again, I would argue, or at least I have come to be in a world now where I have worked very hard not to throw the baby out with the bathwater in my own views. I don't personally believe that anything I've said so far could potentially be good for someone. We all want to believe we have meaning. We all want to believe that there's a chance for us to have purpose. And maybe this idea that there's something bigger than just one embodiment is okay. But then what ends up happening in this group is if your soul is older than your body, a lot of rules can quickly go out the window. For example, one of the concepts of soulmates in the group was this term called like vibration, which the idea was that everyone is emanating from the same center source of the universe. And we are all moving back toward our center core on vibrations that have emanated out and pulled back in, kind of like, expansion and contraction, the laws of the universe. Again, sounds interesting, right? But in the idea that you have a like vibration, that soul connection is more important than a body connection. And so if your current relationship may not be working out, it might be because you're actually not supposed to be with that person. You should have a different like vibration, which may be okay. But then it can also be a justification for much older men marrying younger women because their souls are much older than their body, right? In terms of how that might look. So obviously I was planting a lot of seeds here to get into some of the structures that went down. So my dad actually left my mom and married the oldest daughter of Stephen and Trina Camp, who were the leaders of this group. And my dad was 38. She was 19 at the time. A pretty big thing to do. And he wasn't the only one to kind of engage in this kind of idea that he had a different like vibration than the woman that he came to the group with, which was my mom. So Steve Rensch, my father, Debbie Sampson, my mom, they came to the collective together. They divorced. My dad marries a younger woman under the auspices of like vibration. And the next big thing to appreciate, so like vibration is a core premise based on this spiritual belief. And then purpose is a core premise, which is that your soul has a purpose on the planet, that you are here to achieve a purpose, and that actually is more important than any of these biological relationships that have sort of been set up for you, right? And so framing a little bit of the fact that my mom and I were kind of at the bottom of the totem pole in this group, which the group also very openly practiced like hierarchy, and actually you would rank people. Everyone knew kind of where they stood in relation to like the spiritualness of their status. My mom and I were very much on the bottom. My dad was now married to the daughter of Stephen and Trina Camp, and he was the number 2 in the collective as far as rankings go, just behind the leader of the collective, Stephen Camp. But then I learned how to play chess. So we were sort of on the bottom of the totem pole, but I learned how to play chess one summer, the summer of 1995, and I got really good at it, really, really fast. And what became a game was very quickly ordained as my purpose, as my spiritual reason for being on the planet. And so the seeds I have planted, as long-winded as that answer may have sounded, as we go, I'll maybe try to be a little more succinct. If you're like, no, let's just answer the specific question. But I figure this is helpful because
this
once
is great.
we get the initial framework, it's a little bit easier to dive in and out of the specifics. So we've got this like vibration framework. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience. You are a spiritual being having a physical experience in the purpose bucket now. My purpose has been ordained as chess. And so already at the age of 11, I was one of the top chess players in the country. In just a couple of years, I had become an All-American. I was on path to breaking records. And Stephen Camp, who I have mentioned briefly now, who's the leader of the collective along with Trina Camp, he's very much involved in my chess, like has basically become like my dad, right? He's very, very excited, not just for my personal chess, but we've started now a broader chess team within the commune, within the community, the cult. And so this young chess team is experiencing a lot of success. I'm the best player, but there's a lot of very good players, and we're all doing very well. And we end up in a spot where my mom's relationship with me was sort of put under the microscope anytime I wasn't doing well at chess, under the idea that, hey, like, are you standing in the way of this kid's spiritual purpose? Do you think you're enlightened enough to support this type of calling? Like, he could change the world in terms of, in terms of bringing our teaching to the planet if he becomes the world chess champion or a great chess player. And so I was also being sort of, indoctrinated with this as well. And we ended up in a spot where my mom and I were both sort of on board with this idea that my spiritual purpose came before our relationship. And, for TLDR reasons, for too long didn't read versions of the memoir, essentially this all came, down when Stephen Camp kind of pulled the trigger and basically said, hey, we're taking Danny away from Debbie and he's going to go live with his dad in Marlow. But I didn't know my dad at all. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to consider my dad my father, because that would have been considered a sin in the teaching, because that would have been a biological claim, not a spiritual claim. So I had my whole life been told, one, I didn't even know my dad was my dad until I was like 7 or 8 years old. Then I was told, don't ever think about him as your father, because that would be spiritual lust, literally lusting after like the spiritual hierarchy, which I was not a part of because I'm on the bottom of the totem pole. But then I get really good at chess, and it's like, actually, we're going to have you go live with your dad in Marlow, which was sort of used as the justification to take me away from my mom. But I was very quickly sent to live alone in the valley, as we called it, because this whole group is in Tonto Village, Arizona, which is a very small suburb outside of Payson, Arizona. And so I was sort of orphaned in broad daylight of the collective, with Stephen Camp as my acting parent, my dad and Marlow as like my claimed pretend parents, not allowed to talk to my mom. And I spent my entire adolescence and teenage years being a top chess player who traveled the world that many saw as one of the best young talents in the country, but actually an orphan kid in the middle of a cult who had been taken away from his mom. And one of the craziest things that happened, and then I'll be quiet and let you ask another question, was that I had already become an All-American with the last name Danny Gordon. And so I think I'm still like maybe the only All-American in history to change their name after already having achieved like some sort of like status in chess, which definitely took a lot of people in the chess world by surprise and caused some double takes. But, no one knew enough to double click hard enough and figure out what was really going on. But okay, so I've given you a basic framework of what is a pretty crazy childhood, again, without getting into even more of some of the rated R details, which I'm sure we can do if you want.
Yeah. Well, the Gordon name came because your mom married someone else. That's where that name comes from.
Yeah.
Well, real quickly, can you talk a little bit about, because in the book you reference the channel, that Trina channel, Duran.
Yes.
Can
I'm sorry.
Talk a little
skip past that.
Yeah, no, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Sorry. This is a
No
lot to get into. We described the fundamental belief system as you are a spiritual being having a physical experience. Two major concepts that kind of governed the teaching were: you have a like vibration, our term for soulmate. You are using this relationship as a tool to move back toward your higher self, and you have a purpose. Your purpose is your reason for being the planet, which is ultimately also a tool, not just for you to help the world, but for you to learn your lessons. So these are the two major things. Where did this teaching come from? This teaching came from a spirit named Dr. Paul Duran, who spoke through Trina Camp. So I definitely skipped past the major foundings of the collective, so thank you for calling me out on that, which is that this group came together initially because Trina Camp herself was a trance medium, a phenomena mediumship. For anyone in that world, you will know that there are differences between how people would describe themselves as psychics, people who would describe themselves as channelers, and then people who would describe themselves as phenomena, or even the term dead trans medium. And a dead trans medium is someone who fully leaves their body and are used as a voice for this other entity to speak through. There are people who claim to have this type of practice, right? As a phenomena medium or a dead trans medium, Trina would meditate in a dark room. Sometimes we would sing music. Sometimes you would just sort of, be there and kind of wait. But at some point, Trina's voice would change, and she would be speaking with the voice of Dr. Duran, which had a slightly different accent and a different sort of approach to conversation. And I grew up in this. I grew up in trance circles. This was second nature to me, right? There was nothing about this experience that was necessarily foreign, really. But Dr. Duran's teachings, while there are sub bullets of everything, right? Any you get the high level of a teaching, and then there are ways that is practiced by the people within the group on a daily basis, right? Sort of the sub bullets of the main bullets. But as far as how the collective went, Trina Camp was a trance medium, and her and Steven were traveling the world actually for many years before they decided to start the group. And there's all kinds of debates about this, from their own children to early members of the church. It's not something I get into too much detail in the book because it wasn't my experience, and also like I only kind of know from hearsay. I think there are some that would say that it truly was a bit of a practical thing, that they had been traveling a ton, and that their initial intention was just for people to come to them to hear Duran because they were trying to raise their kids and have a little bit of a different life. And then there are those that say, the intentionality was there all along, and that the idea of starting a group, I don't think anyone starts out to say I'm starting a cult. I think their idea of starting a group was that people would come and that they would financially merge with them, and that they would basically set up the structure that allowed them to govern and have massive say-so and power over a bunch of people's lives, right? What I do know is that Steven and Trina Camp, and you can look this up on the internet, people will, you can Google them. She tranced in a courtroom. She tranced on national television. There are lots of different records of what she was doing in the 70s and early 80s at this time. But when they started the group initially in Mesa, Arizona, and then eventually relocated to Tunnel Village, Arizona, that is when my parents and a lot of the earliest sort of joining members moved to Arizona. And my mom and dad had heard Duran. I think they first heard Duran in LA at a trance circle. Again, Steven and Trina had sort of been traveling, at least the country. And so, yeah, that was what the collective was founded on, this idea that you have a phenomena medium who is delivering messages from a spirit that have never really been heard before, and it's pretty out there in terms of awesomeness. At least that would be what my mom would say in terms of how she felt about it. And so a lot of people packed up and moved and were willing to give up not just their money, but give up their lives to some degree in service of and in pursuit of their best selves, right? And again, I'm describing it in its most objective, kind of benign sense, without even getting into like, okay, well, why do people join cults? What is missing in their life? What are they not able to see at the time? How can someone not understand that what they were doing was already signing up for a term I've used many times, a covert contract, where you sign something you don't even know you're signing, in terms of giving your agency away, and that your relationship with God, your relationship with evolving toward your higher self, now is really in the hands of someone else, right? And they are the ones who are ultimately judging and deciding whether you are spiritually, up to snuff, right? And I think there's obviously a lot of conversation to get into in terms of people's relationship with a divine, with any type of religion, in terms of when those types of things, can happen. I think in a lot of cases, but yeah. So that was the fundamental reason for the group to start, was that people came to hear Dr. Duran speak through Trina, and I was a part of a generation of people who were born into this group, right? I was born in 1985. I would say that I was kind of around the first generation of kids within a couple of years who knew nothing else, who were literally born into the community.
Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate the detail here. Yeah, we've hosted previously on this podcast Mark the Sensei, who became one of the high-up members of the Nixium cults, an incredible filmmaker. We went into the psychology of cults a fair bit in that episode, which is an incredible one for people to check out. A couple questions that came up for me. Was this Dr. Duran a real previous living person that she was channeling? And how did you eventually exonerate from the cults? Like, what was the collapse and the separation like?
Yeah. So the claim was that Dr. Duran was real, that he lived in the 15th century, somewhere in the mid 1400s, that he was a doctor in the broader kind of UK, England sort of area, England, Ireland, Scotland. I don't know exactly. Trina also tranced other spirits. There were other voices and spirits and messages. There was a trance she tranced a spirit named Flying Eagle, who was an indigenous Native American. There were trances with others, but Dr. Duran became like the main and only spirit, and it was his teachings that the group was sort of founded on. And so there's two discussions, right? There's like, what was the claim? Dr. Duran was claimed to be a real person in the 14th century. These were his teachings. And then there's the question of what do I believe now? And we can get into that in a little bit if we want to, as far as my experience of what went down. Where do I land ultimately? If you want to ask those questions, well, I think there's a bigger discussion regarding that. But in regards to the cult, as far as one of the things I explain in the book is that my perspective was less that the cult fell apart it was less that I escaped, and it was more that it fell apart. And what I mean by that is, like, I think as different things happened in my life, I know Yerasimos has read the book. So ultimately, as I healed my relationship with my mom, which again, we're doing the TLDR versions here of just how crazy traumatic that was and how long it took. I was estranged and taken from my mom. I didn't speak to her for 10 years, which is crazy to think that you could be living in the same sort of group and that would go down. There were all kinds of things that started happening in the group. It was literally turf wars. People were turning on each other because of the things that tend to drive the worst of human behavior always, which is money, power, and sex, right? So fundamentally, I would say that disagreements, turf wars, bad marriages, bad divorces, inheritance that was coming in, and people are like, I'm getting inheritance and now I don't want to give the money away. Like the kind of shit you would imagine that might go down when the real world starts to hit on a group that was based on a lot of kind of idealistic bubbles started to happen. You know, when you do have your kids grow up, often you end up realizing you maybe don't want the same life for them. You do look at money differently if you have more of it than others. These are kind of basic human things. Like marriages do break down, and what happens in those dynamics where both are still wanting to be loyal to Duran, but there's weird stuff going on in pecking order and unfortunately a lot of, I would say, toxic people who weren't the models of how to handle divorces and make the kids feel good about it. That's what I'll say, right? So you have a lot of stuff going down. The collective basically starts to implode on itself. And I think my perspective of it was, as I healed my relationship with my mom and kind of came to terms with this incredible trauma we had been through, my mom then, the very sad twist ending is I spent years estranged from her. And then when I was 26 and she was 64, my mom had a massive stroke and passed away very quickly. So suddenly here I go from not having a relationship with my mom, having the grief and the pain that comes from making sense of a lifetime of trauma in a cult that kind of justified this. And then she dies tragically. And what I didn't see was the type of support from the leadership of the collective and people that maybe you kind of think would be there. And so my perspective was, I feel like I had a very clear sense of this was not all it was cracked up to be, even while I was living in it, right? I think I used the term in the book that I found myself living in the eye of a hurricane, right? Which is like the eye is supposed to be the calmest part of the storm, but you're very aware that you're in a storm, you know what I mean? And so it was like, I came to terms with, or was trying to come to terms with my own life, make my marriage work, raise my very young kids. I had started having kids very young because that's also something that was encouraged in the group. And so my perspective was that it probably wasn't even until I moved to Utah like 6 years ago and really found myself in a new and safe environment. I mean, I was still having panic attacks upwards of just a few years ago. I mean, I have and will be working on my mental health and how I handle stress and what triggers my neurosynapses that are very, traumatized from things. I would say that I have still been dealing with the remnants of this group falling apart. I guess that's my answer, right? And so it wasn't like I woke up in the middle of midnight and was like, I got to get out of here. Although there were some people who had that experience, Joel. Just like there actually were some people who woke up and literally left in the middle of the night, and you woke up the next day and were like, oh man, I won't say her name, but that woman just left last night. She just took her kids and left. And so there were things like that happened, but those were much fewer and far between. I think most people were around for what ultimately was sort of the implosion of the group, not the like escape of the group. Yeah. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. You talk about in the book too, that like that moment when you were taken away from your mother, acted as like this explosion that other mothers were like, whoa,
Yeah.
if this could happen to you, then like they could just take our kids away. And that acted as a bit of a catalyst for people to maybe, think about things differently or leave the collective.
I'm glad you brought that up because so we'll bring it back now to kind of the initial frameworks of you are a spiritual being having a physical experience. Okay. Like, we can get into like goodness of that or whatever. You have a like vibration. Okay. I think a lot of people who are in monogamous relationships or trying to make a marriage work can get behind that, wanting to believe they have a soulmate or they're making it work, right? I kind of go back to it every time because my brain is always processing, where did the good go bad? So it's like spiritual being having a physical experience, like vibration relationship, the idea that you're trying to make something work as a means to like the best version of yourself in compromise and connection and in love and all these things. You have a purpose. But what you also have is a like vibration family and a like vibration experience, meaning there are people in like your soul pod or your soul group, right? Because if you think about the idea, if like vibration is built on this concept that as we all go back toward the center of oneness, we are all merging slowly with others. And so you start to have lifetimes and you start to have experiences with the same types of people, the same types of souls. And you have this moment of we are all going back towards something. So yes, there's an ultimate like vibration, the one person I will be with before we dive back into the cosmic sea of the universe. But there's also like vibration groups. And so if you have a like vibration family, the idea would be that they are the best family for you to become your best self. Well, now on to this point about children. Part of what was justified through my relationship with my mom was this idea, well, maybe she's not my like vibration mother. Maybe she's not my spiritual mother in all time and space. And while that had been like said many times to different kids and families, it had been used to, maybe at its healthiest, help them work out a conflict they were having, but at its least healthiest, it allowed, Stephen and Trina to sort of be the parents of everyone and to kind of manipulate family relationships. And so that had been used, but most of the time it was with older kids. There had never been like an outright, this kid is being taken from his mom because like she's not his spiritual mom. And so to your point, when that actually happened with me and my mom, it literally, and again, this I was told later by a woman who's a very good friend of my mom, who I won't say her name here, but she lived in the collective for many years. She actually left the collective earlier than my mom did, before my mom had her stroke and passed. But she was very close to my mom when I was taken away. In fact, they lived in the same house. And she was like, it was like a bomb went off. Literally, when you were taken from your mom, for all the single women who, by the way, had been left by their husbands under the guide of like vibration and had often married younger women, not always, but often. And they were single women living in a collective, in some ways sort of trapped by the infrastructure because of their, your inability to get out, and you're sort of stuck in this world hoping you get a new like vibration. But the idea that your kids could actually be not just threatened anymore, that maybe they'll go with the dad and the mom. And these weren't like healthy divorces, like, oh, see your dad on weekends kind of thing. This is like, no, they spiritually belong to them now, right? And so the idea that it could happen in broad daylight, and the idea that it did happen, was, like I said, it was like a bomb went off. And, the other woman I already referenced who left in the middle of the night, a lot of evidence would be that this was one of the catalysts for that there was a lot of things that just started being discussed as like, hey, this can actually happen. Like this idea of having a like vibration family, or what your spiritual blood is, was a term that was used. It's not just a concept. Like it might actually go down. And so for me to be as young as I was, and for that to happen the way it did, definitely was I write about it in the book. I think as I've reflected and talked with many, I think that it was maybe one of the first real sort of overreaches in terms of power, in terms of what Stephen and Trina Camp were doing to sort of flex their power, because obviously it's brutal that it happened, and I bear the scars of it, and my mom and I, dealt with it for years, but I think it was also something that people saw and were no longer willing to kind of sit and kind of pretend was okay.
Yeah.
How did things pan out with your father?
So I still have a relationship with my dad. He actually still lives in Tonto Village. And it is a very complicated one, to say the least. there's pain on both sides, and even as someone who wrote the book, and anyone who reads it will say that, my dad is definitely not a good guy in the book. He's definitely not a good guy in my story, and I did not hold back in terms of my truth about our relationship. But I also, I definitely didn't also go out of my way to tell a lot of other stories about my dad. To me, I was focused on just our relationship because that was what mattered. But the truth is, like, my dad was not a good guy, not just in my story. He wasn't a good guy in many people's stories in the collective. Stephen Camp was number one, married to Trina Camp, the deity, the trance medium. My dad, in many ways, was like the enforcer. He was like the lieutenant of the teaching. And, my dad is very sad about this, that he engaged in this behavior. But my dad was the kind of person who they called in when a single mom was having trouble with her unruly son, because he would come in and provide the discipline, right? My dad was also the person who, in many ways, was the one ruffling feathers in people's marriages and willing to say the shit that no one else was willing to say, which, again, you could say never should have been said, right? That's the other way to look at that, right? My dad wore this, like, badge of honor that he was the bull in the china shop. That was literally what he was called, right? And so for many, many years, he was on the top of the food chain, I guess, of the collective. As the cult fell apart, I think there are many people who would say that my dad did more damage than Stephen Camp did to them in their life, right? And that's pretty rough, right? And so all of that said, I obviously have done the best I can to maintain my relationship with my dad. We have been to hell and back many times, and I've also come around to, my dad is not a victim. My dad was a perpetrator in the collective, and I think he has responsibility to take for that, and he will for the rest of his life as long as he's on the planet. That said, I think my dad definitely has been more open and humble to the parts of him that felt manipulated, that felt used, and that felt sort of pushed in ways to do things that obviously he now feels, very, very deep remorse for, is what I would say, right? And so it's weird when you have a choice to make at all times with people who've done bad things and or did you wrong according to your kind of sense of justice. And I think that, I've maintained the best relationship I can with my dad while being honest about the fact that he was never really my dad, never really cared for me until I was forced into his family, which he has now admitted. It took him and Marlo years to admit that they didn't even want me, that the whole thing was kind of Stephen Camp's plan. In fact, one of the things I learned in the process of writing the book, literally in the process of writing the book just a few years ago, was that Stephen Camp initially wanted to adopt me himself and just take me and, like, make me a Danny Camp. I would have been Daniel Camp instead of Daniel Rensch.
Wow.
And that the only reason that didn't happen is because my dad and Marlo were like, that's really messed up. You can't do that, right? Like, even though we understand this spiritual kind of premise of what you're doing. And again, they were on board with it, even though they shouldn't have been. And so, just understanding what went down in terms of that dynamic. And then the fact that I was in my dad's family as a wrench, but in many ways, like, I was abused and tortured by them because they didn't really think of me as their own kid. And in many ways, my dad resented how close I was to Stephen Camp, because really I was Stephen Camp's kid, not my dad's. And now my dad has also talked about how angry and sad and heartbroken he's been about the fact that Stephen Camp, like, never let him in there. And I get to say, well, okay, I'm sorry you're sad, but I was the kid and I was your kid and you didn't do it, dude, right? And so there's many times where, like, when you're dealing with, like, adult victims, it's very hard. And I'm sorry, I'm going to go to therapy land because this is my life and I've done a lot of work to kind of understand this stuff. Like, the type of person who is already emotionally immature enough or operating with enough sort of, like, victimhood about their life to kind of enter a community like this and then give away their agency to the way that they did, and then maybe embrace the part of themselves that has power in a group, and then ultimately come to the other side of it falling apart. Like, I don't really like believe my dad is not telling the truth when he does see himself as a victim, even if I can very clearly point out to him the hypocrisy in such a belief, right? In such a statement. And so it's weird because when you're dealing with people who did a lot of damage but also feel damaged, you just have a choice to make about the type of relationship you want to have. And so I love my dad. I actually have an ongoing email thread with my dad because we don't get to see each other in person very much at all. He had a very hard time with the book, but he has also now come around to feeling, without putting words in his mouth, I would say he has he has been very complimentary of my courage, and definitely doesn't debunk anything I said. And in fact, as I told him, I'm like, Dad, I understand you might be upset about this, but there are a lot of stories about our family dysfunction and some real violent shit that went down that I didn't include in the book. So in many ways, my goal was not to spray a machine gun of anger and hate. My goal was to tell a story of healing and ultimately, hopefully, inspiration, that we are not what happens to us. We are what we choose to become. Carl Jung's quote has been a bit of a North Star for me in my life. And like, that was why I needed to tell this story, because you don't get to have the payoff that a protagonist wants to provide you if you're going to skip past the hard shit. So you got to tell the hard shit in order to get there. And I'm like, Dad, like, you know, a big part of my goal here was to do that. And I think he's understood as best as he can. But to be fair, like, I love my dad, and he has his own sort of karma to reap, to use a phrase from the collective, about what he did. And that's not really mine to shield him from.
Wow,
Yeah.
man. Denny, I just want to say thank you for your open-heartedness, for your vulnerability, for your authenticity. Like, I just know this is going to just support so many other people, man, just in hearing this truth and hearing your story the way you've delivered it. Like, just thank you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I echo that, man. And you're 100% right. It's like where you were and where you've come from, and especially going through and reading the book, like, it's pretty incredible. Like, are people still in the village, like, in some sort of collective, or like following the teachings, or is that kind of all faded away and no one's like an adherent to the immortal,
Yeah, no,
school of consciousness?
it has faded away. So to wrap a ribbon on the logistical timeline, one of the things that held the collective together even longer than the actual collective was still happily together was the school that was in the middle of Tono Village. The Shelby School was a private school that eventually got a charter. It was the school I went to, the school that was known for winning a lot of chess championships. It was in many ways impatient called the school for the cult kids, which is what it was referred to behind our back and sometimes openly. So it was the cult kids school, became a school that was a charter. As the collective was less popular, people leaving, like I said, it's imploding and being dismantled on its own. The school became a place where people went to school, not just people who were in the collective. But when COVID hit and the pandemic literally shut down the school, kind of one of the last centerpieces that was sort of, I guess you could say, the pretend glue holding a dysfunctional Harry Potter castle together. You know what I mean? I think that when that fell apart during the pandemic, that was one of the last straws that broke the people who were maybe still kind of lingering and holding on to the community. And then the next thing was that in 2022, Trina Camp herself passed away.
Oh.
And so when she died, and even though she wasn't trancing very much at all, in fact, in the last year of her life, I don't think she tranced at all. Before that, there's a lot of people that would say, even the most devotees of Dr. Duran, who would say they were not skeptical for the majority of their relationship with the spirit. I think even for them, it was like toward the end, like, hey, this doesn't sound so much like Dr. Duran anymore. This kind of just sounds like Trina's opinion about stuff. So I think her trance, the quality of her trance, whether it was ever real or not, up for discussion, deteriorated regardless, right? It was not as good. And so when she died in 2022 and the school had shut down, whatever was left fell apart. Stephen Camp himself still lived in the village, I think, until very recently. I think he just moved. But people who still lived in Tono Village, I think where they sit, to answer the question that is kind of within that question, is like, where do people sit on their experience with it now? I mean, I think there are all kinds of extremes on the viewpoint. There are those who are living the life that I would define as the definition of drinking hatred is drinking poison and expecting other people to feel sick, that they are incredibly angry. And also, not just to say that I don't think it helps them, I would also say that in many ways, rightfully so, right? There are a lot of people who went through things that were truly horrific in the collective. And I did not share everyone else's experiences or stories in my book because that wasn't the goal of my book, right? But I think there are people who are still coming to terms with, and probably will be for the rest of their life, about what their experience was in the Church of Immortal Consciousness and are angry about it. And then I think there are many who are on the side of whether it ever should have come together or not. The fact is that it did, and they try to focus on what they can to not throw the baby out with the bathwater about some things they may have learned while in the group, right? And I think there are people everywhere in between, right? And as I share in the book, I think one of the things that most people don't want to acknowledge is that a big part of often why it's hard to come to terms with something like this and how it went down, especially for, I would say, the older generation, my parents, is that in many ways, like, they spent so many years as it fell apart kind of being victims to Stephen and Trina, who were the initial people they signed up with and gave away their agency to, that I think for a lot of them, it took a long time for them to see that they also played a big part in keeping the group together, right? And that ultimately the buy-in that is required for a group like that to operate is there, right? And I think, and I'm, you know, I've again, if I can give my father grace and compassion to the part of him that feels manipulated and or was taken advantage of, even though I would argue that along with Stephen Camp, my dad did the most damage of any men there. If I can hold the opposing truth for him, which is both hold him accountable in whatever way is meant to be held accountable, that I am not my dad's maker. I am not the ultimate person who decides justice, but I also will not deny the truth of my experience. But if I can do that while also holding space for love and compassion and have kindness for someone who in many ways was caught up in something that they now would acknowledge they wish hadn't happened. If I can do that for my dad, I can do that for anybody. And so I think that that's, you know, something that a lot of people are still figuring out, to answer your question, Joel, as far as how they feel. And a lot of it comes down to just what they now believe about life, you know, about what's important or what their spiritual or kind of religious views might be, if they find such a thing to help them or not, you know?
Yeah.
Let's
talk about chess.
Yeah, I want to talk. I do want to.
We've done the deep stuff. Yeah,
I want to get I want to get into chess, but I do want to bring up this. What is your view in terms of what Duran was Trina connected? Because there's a part in the book where you talk about you were having this dream, and then someone came and said that Duran like talked about white horses, and you had white horses in your dream or something of that nature. And like, you know, I think there are people in the world that have certain powers and connection to things that are a little bit more, you know, from a pretty wild phenomena nature. But like, where do you stand? Like, how do you feel about that experience? What are your views around spirituality and deeper connections now?
Channeling.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's the $1 million question to some degree that I have now been asked more than a few times. And I will first start by saying that my journey has been a wild one, right? I have also been, I think, on the side of it was all bullshit, super angry and hurt and skeptical about anything that went down, and also just unable to reconcile what happened in my human being and to a lot of human beings as something that ever could have been allowed if spirit was real, right? So I've been fully on that side. At the same time, as you sort of like deconstruct anything that happens to you in your life, I think if you are willing and wanting to do the hard work through therapy, through your own just self-reflection of asking yourself some bigger questions, regardless of your hurt or your experience, I have kind of come around through, let's call it, on the one side, it was extreme, you know, atheism or at least agnosticism out of anger and heartache, to where I sit now. I think as I deconstructed, or let's say the scaffolding fell and I decided what parts I was going to stand back up, I think a big part of my journey has been one where I have taken such a scientific approach to the miracle of life, where I have focused less on what I think most religion does, which is the why we're here, because why is essentially storytelling. You are deciding why you're here, or providing some sense of dogma if you're in a religion of, you know, whatever the rules are, to Christianity or Islam or whatever, and focusing less on the why, which is man-made meaning, and actually rebuilding a lot of my spiritual belief on the how, meaning the undeniable miracle of life, that at some point something came from nothing. Existence is here. I am that I am, and I'm aware of it somehow, some way, whether this is the Matrix in a simulation experience or some version of something. At what point did either space-time come from nowhere or awareness of space-time come from nowhere, right? Because in all things in life, we know there is the material act that brings something to life, like a house, and then there is the will. Everything in life has material and the will behind it. And as I've jumped in pretty deeply down the where science meets spirituality and kind of coming to this sort of existentialist point of view, which is that I think, therefore I am. At some point, something came from nothing. I can't deny whether that was awareness of an initial Big Bang or some other version that I am unable to fully comprehend in this sort of, ego embodiment. I do believe that if I'm choosing, I do tend to lean that consciousness is more likely to be fundamental than space-time. Awareness of existence would be the first and foremost requirement. Again, labeling this word God or the universe or oneness or cosmic consciousness and truth is actually less relevant to me, because I would argue that for anyone who kind of dives down that road, language is limited in terms of whatever you would really try to think of in terms of what existence is. So I know I'm giving you a big answer, but it's because for me, you asked a very big question, and I can't answer it without describing how I arrived there, which is that if I believe in the miracle of existence, regardless of the framework that may be a single lifetime existence, a simulation experience, many lifetimes, some idea that there is a journey to a oneness that existed has kind of put me on the path of believing consciousness is fundamental. And if I believe that consciousness has the potential to live outside the material body, then I do not inherently debunk the idea that a spirit could deliver messages through a physical body. I don't inherently debunk the idea that phenomena and or the concept of reincarnation, the idea that we are spiritual beings evolving toward some sort of higher self, is inherently crazy. I actually don't believe that the idea that we could be evolving back toward whatever this initial oneness was that I described, something came from nothing, is inherently a crazy concept. And so what's weird for me is that as much as I also saw how concepts like you are a spiritual being having a physical experience can be weaponized, concepts like a like vibration, as we go back to the oneness of the universe, can be weaponized and used in an ego human way of younger women marrying older men. As much as I have seen the idea of purpose and meaning be misused and abused, right? I actually have come around to holding space for the fact that what a lot of people want to do is be black and white and angry or sad or whatever about their experience, when I think it's possible to hold opposing truths, which is maybe Trina Camp was trancing a spirit, and that didn't mean that she wasn't running a cult. Maybe she could be a toxic narcissist who was raised and abused by alcoholics, and a lot of that became the worst version of herself as she got older. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything Duran ever said was untrue, right? And I think all you can do is have your own experience. And I did have the experience that I shared in the book, which was a dream that I have to this day been unable to explain. I had other, experiences of sitting in trance circles where I felt not just moved, but like sort of undeniably, I think, reached by like something that was said in a way that even if it was coming from a faker Trina Camp or a spirit, it definitely made a difference from my life, right? And so I think it's difficult because I do not inherit. Here's what I would say as a human being: cults are real. I was raised in one, and people should be very much aware of the dangers of giving away your own spiritual relationship with any divine power you believe to anybody else. And I think any religion has the potential to become a cult when they stop helping you ask life's big questions and start telling you they have all the answers. Mm-hmm. And I think every religious infrastructure has the ability to be a little bit culty. Mm-hmm. That said, I do believe that consciousness is fundamental, which if I start with that, how do I get to say that and then deny the idea that a spirit and or spiritual beings and that I am a spiritual being exists, right? And so I actually feel like holding space for both of those is not intellectually dishonest at all. And in fact, it's probably more honest to the nuance that is a very complicated life that none of us really understand than one where I pretend to be like, oh, because this person did bad things, he's just evil. Yeah. The real mind F is that sometimes people do bad things and they actually did mean well. And then even more mind F, it ended up being the best thing that could have happened for you, right? And the thing is, like, that's all we can actually do. And that was the main thing I wanted to share in terms of where I've arrived on that, because forgiveness is not, rewriting the past. It's freeing yourself from it. I don't have to make excuses for my abusers to tell the story, which is that I no longer feel angry at them about what happened because I've done the work now to make sense of it. And if you're not going to change the end of your life, you don't get to cherry pick the middle or the beginning either. It's just not how it works. And so that's sort of my philosophy on a lot of this stuff. And that is my spiritual, existential answer to the question of, I had very real experiences with Dr. Duran. Whether Duran was real or not is not up for me to crawl inside Trina Camp's heart and see what she did. I do believe in the idea that consciousness is fundamental as a more plausible framework for the miracle that is existence than I do that space-time came from nowhere, even if that's hard for us to fully wrap our brains around. And so if I do believe that, I would find it hypocritical to dismiss the idea that phenomena, mediumship, or cosmic consciousness might be able to reach humanity through human beings. So there is my answer, like it or not.
Dude, it's a great answer. I appreciate it. I appreciate you embracing the nuance and the complexity of being human and the mystery of being alive and what this place is. So I'm
So
happy
sorry if that got a little long-winded, but it's hard.
No.
People ask that question, and it's very hard for me to answer because I feel like I'd be a hypocrite if I just go, well, Duran is real and he did a bunch of fucked up shit in a cult. Like, that's not real for me. I have to explain how I arrived at that. So hopefully that's okay.
It is, man. I mean, we're here for the truth of your experience. You know, it's complicated, it's nuanced. Like I really appreciate it that you shared that in the way that you did. But I guess we could go to Joel's question.
Yeah,
Talk about chess. And I want to start this off with, what do you love about chess?
Oh man. I love the game itself in that I always start with it is just a game. Obviously it's been my life's purpose, and someone who has, seen it both give me everything and take everything away at different times. So it's clearly that the game of chess has represented a lot more for me than just, wooden pieces on a board. But to me, like, the game itself is kind of perfect in that, like, it is simultaneously unsolvable. We still have the most powerful machine-learned AI in the world unable to solve the game of chess. We can put human beings on the moon or maybe Mars at some point, and yet we haven't solved a game of complete and defined geometry and information. That's kind of fascinating when you think that there are more positions in chess than there are atoms in the universe. It's a cosmic game that is unsolvable, and yet in every position there is objectively like a best move. And, or at least as far as our ability to like see, we believe we see a best move. And there's something about that is like, it basically is probably the reason why chess itself has been considered its own religion and have its own cult following, because I think people can worship at sort of the feet of the unsolvable nature of the game and the idea that I could still play a perfect game if I keep trying, right? So it's a great game. It's just a great puzzle. It's super rewarding in that, like, you literally never play a game of chess where you don't learn something. And, I think nowadays I tend to appreciate, even more about the game from like the lessons it provides. I mean, chess, everybody should be playing chess, especially at a young age, because every other game that is like rolling a dice is like, oh, you either got lucky or you didn't, or you pulled the card that, helped you win. Like, every game like has this like sense that your success is outside of your control. Chess is the opposite. Chess is like, you only are successful in chess based on your contribution to the board, right? And also your ability to kind of self-reflect about where things might have gone wrong is the only way to improve. And so I think chess is a perfect game for, things that it inherently teaches people without trying.
Yeah.
And just from an enjoyment standpoint, it's just fun. It's just awesome. And obviously, like, I don't play like I used to. I don't play at the levels I used to. I play on my phone like everybody else these days on chess.com. But yeah, chess is amazing, man. And it's like, I think it's the perfect game of unsolvable, yet there's always something to learn, because you could have played a better move if you look at it afterwards.
Yeah. Well, it kind of sounds, I learned playing chess at an early age. I love playing chess. When I was younger, I definitely don't play anywhere near as much. But it's almost like a microcosm of the self-development process. Like, you're always learning something. You're always enhancing your reason. You're always enhancing your rationality. You're taking feedback from the gameplay, from your opponent, from whatever it might be, and then visiting the board again, and kind of testing where you're at.
Yep.
What are the origins of chess?
So chess in its earliest forms was started in India. It was the game Chaturanga is sort of the farthest back we can go to like where we saw like, we have like, the idea of like limited squares rotating black and white or dark and light. And Chaturanga itself was taken by Alexander the Great and the Persian army as it was doing the thing it was doing and conquering different areas of Eastern Asia. And as it moved, as Alexander the Great moved back west, he actually brought chess from India to the West.
Wow.
So the earliest stories of chess making its way into Eastern and eventually Western Europe all start with the Persian army after sort of the conquests of East Asia. And where it went from there is interesting because chess bounced around Europe and there were different variations of it being played, but the modern game that we play today took form 100% in the 14th century when Queen Isabella, who you could argue, so 15th century, sorry, in the 1400s, 15th century, you could argue that Queen Isabella was the most powerful human being on the planet at the time. And Spain was the most powerful country. They were sending Columbus on adventures, and they were sort of dictating the rules of Europe at the time. And she literally dictated the rules of chess to change it. At the time, the king and queen were actually both weak pieces as royalty, and you actually had this piece called the Duke that was a little more akin to the modern queen that we now know. She changed the rules to give the queen the ultimate power, and the queen became the most powerful piece because of Queen Isabella. A lot of people don't know this story, which is fascinating, that she, in her own likeness, right, in her own image, made the queen the most powerful piece. And that game is the game that we now play today, with only one other a small rule change that happened around pawn movements, which was en passant, which means in passing in French. There's a rule that is played today in terms of governing a pawn's initial move, which I won't get into. It's a little bit too deep for the non-chess players, but essentially the queen's movement and en passant all took shape around the late 1400s, early 1500s, and we've been playing that same version of chess ever since. That is the version that has stayed. And to add a little bit to that, I would say one of the coolest things about chess is that for whatever reason, whether I think about this a lot as like a bit of a chess philosopher these days in terms of where I sit. And one of the goals I had in writing the book was I wanted to tell the story of the game in sort of an accessible, exciting way. So, Yerasimos, I'm curious how you felt about the chess parts, because I tried my best to make it interesting and make it accessible for people who maybe don't know, our history. I think that chess, for whatever reason, has always been directly tied to like highly influential people, high society. And it might be the origins of moving west at the time with maybe the most powerful human being on the planet, for better or worse, settling into Europe as sort of the royal game, and a game that was really only played in kind of the upper echelon circles, right? The elite, whether actual royalty or those with influence and money, right? And what ended up happening was chess became sort of like a benchmark for a lot of things in terms of creative expression during like the Romantic era and the Renaissance. And then eventually like it became sort of a symbol of, intellectual strategic power during the battle of USSR versus, the West. Mm-hmm. There are these things where chess has always been sort of revered as this like, those who are good at chess are like the most intellectually elite that our species can summon. Whether it's true or not, that was sort of the thing. And even nowadays, you look at how it's used in media, right? There's a reason they say it's a chess game out there, Bob, between the coaches, right? There's a reason it's used in Mercedes-Benz commercials, because it's like there's like a sex appeal to this this feeling of these like really, intelligent people sort of battling. And again, this has been historical as part of chess. Chess has been a part of this sort of like part of human culture forever. And then, of course, it was directly on the front lines of the battle of man versus machine with Garry Kasparov in the 90s and the battle against IBM. And even now, chess is being often associated with kind of the next breakthrough of what the neural nets are doing, and how the machine learning project of AlphaZero with DeepMind, made major breakthroughs. So it's just fascinating. Chess is the oldest game, like this incredibly old game, but consistently on the front lines of what people are looking to like emulate in society and culture, and how they refer to the best performers, They're playing chess, not checkers, right? So it's just fun. I don't even know. It's just like been so amazing to see that, we've obviously been trying to break down the idea that it's a royal game meant for the elite with a wrecking ball. I mean, chess.com's goal has been to democratize and bring the game to the masses. And I would say that I've been called an evil chess popularist on the internet, and it's a badge I wear proudly. I added it to my Twitter profile for a while by the old guard who was like, what are you doing? Making the game more accessible and faster time controls and fun and in your face. And so I think chess is much more than just a game for the elite, but it is also that. It is also a game that represents this really kind of high-minded achievement that we want to have. And so I kind of appreciate that it can be both.
Dude, I love chess, and I have to be honest, I haven't played in a long time. I played in my teens into my early 20s, and then I just stopped playing. And so like this is kind of reinvigorating my desire to get online, get on chess.com.
You got a free membership waiting for you. I'll just give you a diamond membership. $150 a year. I'll save it to you. Just give me your username and I'll send it to you.
Hey,
You're amazing, man.
There's two of us here, man. There's two of us here.
Yeah.
Both of you guys.
Well, it's funny. I know you talked about dice before, but Joel and I like to play backgammon battles with each other, because we enjoy the game of backgammon because, there's some luck, there's luck in there, but obviously there's skill there.
There's a lot of and I wasn't trying to disparage all dice games. There are definitely games that are both a mixture of luck and skill. I would say poker is like that. Poker is very much luck and skill, but it's a different game when it is not complete information. The accountability you feel afterwards is not the same unless you kind of choose it, right? A lot of people, you have to, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and it's like chess is one of those games where it's like, I mean, I don't know, it's like, it feels like 100% skill versus 0 luck. It's just like you're playing another person, and unless like, if you're a different color, like how does that work? Like, are you more likely to win if you're white versus black? Yeah. Like, how does that play out?
So the data speaks for itself to some degree. Statistically, white wins 56% of the time. Black wins 44% of the time. But I would say at the higher levels, it's a little closer to 60-40 because the better a player is, the more they know how to use the advantage of the first move. And I think there are other games like that too, like backgammon. And there are games where like if you know the right patterns, i.e. in chess openings, as we call them, if you are executing openings at an extremely high level and you are providing that kind of grandmaster level of preparation, the advantage of the first move is more valuable in your hands than it is for amateurs, right? So the closer you get to beginner level chess, the closer it's basically random, 50-50. There is no real advantage for black or white. The higher levels you get, the closer you are to about 60-40, I think at the highest levels. But also at the highest levels, you get more draws anyway. So even if white is winning 60% of the decisive results, you also at the higher levels see more games that end in peace because people make less mistakes. So both are true at the same time, right? White is more of an advantage. When you have a decisive result, white tends to win more often than black. But you also tend to have more games end in draws.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently watched the Queen of Chess Netflix documentary about Judith.
Oh, it's so good, right? I hope you like it.
It's so good, man. Especially those Kasparov battles and how she finally overcame him at one point in time. But yeah, very often she played white first and she would just get dominated by him like for 40 matches or something before. It's so good, man. What are the ways in which you view chess as a microcosm of life?
The metaphors of chess to life and chess to business are many. And I kind of already gave one, which is like, I do think it's ultimately better to choose self-reflection than it is victimhood. And I think that even if I didn't know that chess was sort of forcing me to think this way at a young age, I think I have personally experienced sort of the power of, well, like it or not, this is my position, arguing with how I got to this position, deciding whether or not it feels fair to be in this position, are all essentially irrelevant because this position has a few options and probably the best option is to move forward. Yeah. And I think that there's a larger metaphor there that is both, it sounds abstract and a bit kind of, airy-fairy at its core. Yeah, we all have to just choose to move forward in our life. But the reality is, like, when you think of that Carl Jung quote, I am not what happens to me, I am what I choose to become, it sounds inspiring until you sit with it. When you sit with it, you realize it's a call to action. It's a responsibility, and that you are actually responsible because regardless of your spiritual, metaphysical, or any lack thereof beliefs, as long as you are still on the planet and conscious, no matter where you were or how you got here, like you are responsible for where you go from here. And I think that there are like lessons in chess that are just, and you don't even have to try to pull these lessons out. They are like within the game. It is a truly intimate experience when you lose a chess game. There is no teammate to point to, no referee to blame a bad call on. You face the music and self-reflect, or you don't. It's that simple. There are things about like literally, I mean, if we're talking about planning and strategic thinking, I think chess is such a good balance of both are required to do good high-level decision-making, which is a holistic view of the entire picture, the pawn structure, the strategy that is sort of inherent to this particular position, but also ultimately you have to roll up your sleeves and do the calculation work, the tactics that ultimately will move you forward in a safe way. And I think that there's a lot of balance to, a lot of people want to have big ideas. They don't want to do the hard work. Sometimes people can stay stuck in the world we live in now, which is like, everything is demanding your, we live in the attention economy and dragging you around. And not many people take the time to maybe do the type of, whether it's self-reflection or just meditate for a minute and think about the big picture of what it is they're trying to accomplish. I think that you actually need to do both in order to be successful in a lot of areas. And I think that chess sort of demands that you have those muscles in ways that other games don't. And I could probably continue down the different chess metaphors. I mean, there are literal just like considering your options before you move ahead, right? Also recognizing that chess, unlike a lot of other games, requires you to think about what your opponent wants. It takes two to tango in life to make anything really great work. What's funny is like you have this, if you want to have a great plan, most people lose because they're so focused on their ideas that they miss the checkmate over here. Like literally that's what amateur chess is until you build the muscle to acknowledge that someone else is just as important as you in life, you will not be a successful chess player. And I think probably that's the thing that is most useful for young people about chess is that so many games are just rewarding of selfish thought, which is like, I have to roll the dice and move my piece around the board, and what everyone else is doing is kind of in their own path, right? It's not really, I don't really have any say-so, nor do I really have any sort of control, and it doesn't affect me. Chess is like this massive lesson in like, why did they go there? What do they want to achieve? Like, what do I need to be thinking about to anticipate what's coming here? And the best chess players, I think, almost go so far that they become paranoid human beings in life. And I've said this on record many times. I deal with all the best players in the world. Sometimes I think that their best skill of being prophylactic in nature, trying to defend against the threat of the future, prophylaxis, is actually something that hurts them in life, where they tend to be more distrusting and more paranoid than they should be about other types of things or opportunities or relationships. And without calling or putting any of them on blast, let me just say that as someone who has been in the business of growing chess, the amount of times I feel like I have to literally lead a horse to water and make them drink to help us do things that would be good for the game, when everyone wants to be treated like Mike, but no one wants to do the work, right? And I'm like, guys, like, let's work together here. So I think that chess players can sometimes take that particular skill too far. Yeah. But overall, I think that, chess players are critical thinkers, skeptical in healthy ways, because no one should just accept someone else's truth as their reality unless they've double-clicked more than a few times. But also, they are objective in that they understand that they have a position. They have to make the best move with what's in front of them. Beating themselves up about the past is often counterproductive. And the only real time to do it is after the game is over anyway, to take some time to learn. And at that point, we only review the past to be better for the future. Anything else is just masochism, And so I think that those things are really great about chess players and in terms of what the game teaches.
Yeah. The one thing I loved reading in the book was that we share a favorite movie, which is Searching for Bobby Fischer. And I absolutely love that book. And I love how that like put you on the journey of like becoming obsessed with the game of chess. And also just like the incredible characters. Granted, it's in a movie, but like what you talked about in the book, these characters at like the chess emporium.
Igor.
Yeah, well, Igor too. And then like the chess emporium guys that like went off on the kid. Or like, it's just amazing the types of people that get drawn to chess and also like the journeys that they're on, but it's pretty cool.
Well, we skipped past that part because I was joking that there's a too long didn't read version of the book, but as I described learning chess in the summer of 1995, what Yerasimos just mentioned is I learned chess because I watched the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer and was just like enthralled and fascinated. There's more to that. I'll just quickly say because anyone who has their interest piqued, several things came together. Sometimes you hear stories and you go like, was it lightning in a bottle, or was it just this sort of, the outliers theory that Malcolm Gladwell talks about, the unique circumstances that had to come together for a kid being raised in a cult to become obsessed with chess? There were three things that happened in the summer of 95. I saw the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, which had come to HBO. I think it came out like in 93, whatever, but that was when I saw it. I saw it on TV, 95. The collective itself was under attack from a lot of local, I would say this openly now, even naming it a cult, a lot of bigotry. You had literal rednecks running. I was ran off the road by a pickup truck and people were yelling, fucking freaks. And like kids were like unsafe. Someone showed up at the Shelby school with a gun, like threatening to kill Trina. There was crazy stuff going down and essentially kind of like redneck backwoods Arizona, that this spiritual group that for all respective reasons, like we weren't practicing anything crazy violent. Again, it was a cult for a lot of reasons, but there was no drink the Kool-Aid agenda. No one was stacking firearms like Waco. There was nothing going on here that justified the way we were being treated that summer. And Steven and Trina had hired a bunch of bodyguards to protect everybody. And so we were on house arrest. This is the funny thing, is I watched this movie and all of the kids are literally on house arrest. Normally we're just outside playing in the woods, but we weren't allowed to that summer. So what else am I going to do besides play chess? And then the third thing that happened in 95 was the match between Garry Kasparov and Vishwanathan Anand. The world championship match was in New York. This was the first time the World Chess Championship had been on Western soil in literally decades, right? So that meant that Western media actually cared about chess again for the first time in a long time. So the three things that happened were this match was everywhere on the news and caught the attention of Stephen Camp. The movie Searching for Bobby Fischer inspired a bunch of kids to play chess, and we didn't have anything else to do because we were under house arrest because of this crazy shit that was going down. So like I think about it now with clarity and go, oh my God, like that, like how lucky am I that was my experience in terms of jumping into chess. But then, then we quickly started traveling. And to your point, we met a lot of the characters in the chess world that are just absolutely legendary. I would say this now, the chess world today is not the chess world I grew up in. It is way more mainstream. I mean, literally just the numbers are there. There are tens of millions of more people playing chess around the planet, which is great. And again, the technological digital revolution that has been making chess easy and accessible on your phone or computer has completely changed just the amount of people within the global chess community. And so when you get more people, I guess by definition, you'll get more on all ends of the spectrum, both the extremes, but also you get more normal people too. So to your point, I would say I now visit chess clubs, Yerasimos, and I go, man, these people are way more normal than the guys I grew up with. I visit chess clubs now and go, oh my God, this is like a totally normal environment. Like there's no one super crazy here. And it's not the chess emporium of the mid 1990s. So that's how I'm answering that is yes, the characters were crazy, but I would say the chess world nowadays is actually a lot more balanced than the one that I was raised in.
Yeah, I know you're not here to technically promote your book, but I want to promote the book. So for anyone listening, you have some amazing stories, and even just Igor's story of how he, what he went through when he came from and how he ended up being your teacher, like was just incredible. So
crazy. Yeah, Igor's life is its own memoir movie, and he is no longer here. He eventually got cancer and died, but Igor defected from the Soviet Union, literally ran across like asylum lines, like during an emergency stop in Newfoundland with KGB agents like chasing him, like literally some crazy spy movie shit. Somehow makes his way eventually over the next decade to the Southwest and bumps into a cult leader who's building a chess team and then ends up moving to Tonto Village, Arizona. And at one point was probably the most visible and present male role model in my life, which is not saying much because he was a raging alcoholic who I would show up to at 9 a.m. as he was sprawled out naked. And he would ask me to make him a screwdriver. I knew how to make a very good half OJ, half vodka drink at the age of 11. Or sorry, no, Igor didn't come until a little later, age of 13. So yeah, Igor is quite the character, and
Do you
I've
have
been
the
told by
chessboard?
people that
Do
yeah,
you
go
have the
ahead.
chessboard anywhere that he gave you? Because I know you talk about it in the book.
Yeah, it's so it's actually downstairs here at my house.
Gotcha.
It's not behind me. One of the funny things, I get given a lot of chessboards now, so you can see this room is like full of chess decoration, which I would say is half intentional, half like I have no place else to put stuff at this point. So like I've got all these, several of those chessboards behind me are like are known in the chess community. But yeah, Igor's set is near and dear to me. I still have it. The pieces have been a little banged up at this point, but I still have the initial chessboard that we did all that training on.
Yeah.
Are your
Amazing
kids into
story.
chess?
So what's funny is right now they've gotten obsessed with it again. They go in and out. The high level answer is no. None of my kids got super into chess. We skipped past kind of the early days of barely making my marriage work, but I'll say that I had my first kid at 20, basically 19, because he's born like a month after me. I was 19 during the pregnancy. I turned 20 in October. He was born the beginning of November. So I'm 40 years old with a 20-year-old, a 17-year-old, a 14, almost 15-year-old, and a 10-year-old. Of a boy, girl, girl, all the same marriage. We somehow made it work. And of all of my kids, my youngest daughter, Talia, is probably the most into chess, and we've done chess lessons and coaching. I ended up doing tons of sports with my boys. They just weren't that into chess. And Hazel, my middle girl, I always joke, she doesn't have a competitive bone in her body. Like she just doesn't like, she's not into like sports or games of any kind. And so it just was never her thing. And so how it works out is funny, because if they had gotten into chess, they had a perfect dad for it. But when they weren't going to get into chess organically, it just wasn't going to be something I was going to push very hard. All of that said, they have been on this wild ride like everyone else as the pandemic hit and our business boomed. And then the Queen's Gambit on Netflix came out and our business boomed. And we continue to be the beneficiary in so many ways of this massive chess revolution. So they have gone from their dad being someone who runs this really obscure small little chess business to being like, they have friends who go like, your dad runs chess.com? Like, I love chess.com. So like chess has completely changed from what it was. It's no longer the nerd thing that it was when I was little. And so they go in and out of playing just like with their own friends. It's way more of like a casual thing than anything else.
Yeah. What lessons can you share with the audience about your relationship? Because that's the one thing reading the book, I was like, man, your wife, Shauna, I think was her name, is like a saint, like what you guys have went through and gone through, and pretty amazing to like stay together, stay connected, and to go on your journey. Obviously all relationships have their challenges and problems, but you both also met in the collective.
Yeah, it's also a very big question. To provide a little bit of background, so people can appreciate that I really did intend to share with full vulnerability and full authenticity of what I went through, getting to the other side of this very traumatic experience. And one of the goals with that was that I wasn't going to tell a Hollywood version of my life. I wasn't going to say I went through all this super traumatic shit and started having panic attacks at the age of 13, dealt with real anxiety and depression, and was like abused and traumatized, and then snapped my fingers. Now I'm in my mid-20s in a happy marriage, right? I wasn't going to tell that story. I wasn't going to sort of Hollywoodify the story arc. I wanted to share what it was to be a damaged individual, right? Because wounded people wound people until they don't anymore. Hurt people, and I was not, I was not a healthy person. I was an alcoholic in my early 20s. I was abusing opioids, taking Klonopin and Xanax to this extreme degrees that my wife didn't know. I was not the best husband or father. In my book, my wife actually had to back me down a lot, because she was like, you need to be kinder to yourself too, right? It wasn't like I was a bad person, or in no ways did I ever, was I ever physically violent or anything, but I wasn't great, right? And I wasn't treating myself well, let alone anybody else, right? And I think I wanted to share, what I feel is required to do the work of self-reflecting and acknowledge that often often to really start dealing with your pain, it starts first and foremost with no longer being okay with the pain you're inflicting on others or yourself now, right? And I think, it's just the work for me has been around like coming to terms with the fact that even if I went through really hard stuff, I no longer wanted to live sad, angry, depressed, or abuse the things that I was abusing. I wanted to start making changes. And a lot of that did happen around my marriage, as I shared, which was really, one, her almost divorcing me, two, me just appreciating that that I wanted something different for my life and for my kids. And to explain kind of what I've learned in that, I mean, with my wife, I would say that, wow, so many things. I would say that first and foremost, as I shared, I think she helped me unpack why I had gotten into this type of behavior. When you're engaging in self-deprecating actions of any kind, there's a reason why, right? And a lot of my spiritual self-worth was wrapped up in this idea that I had failed to achieve my purpose on the planet because I didn't become the world chess champion. And, a lot of what she kind of got, her hands around me to realize is that, hey, like I had a lot of purpose with my wife and my kids, and that purpose is not the thing you do, it's why you do the thing, right? And that you can choose to have purpose in anything you do, no matter what it is. And I think she was the first person to really start unwinding the fact that I felt like it's almost like child actor syndrome. Like I felt like a failed child actor or child prodigy, right? And so a lot of the things I had developed about myself and just how I just didn't feel like I was worth anything, like started with all of that stuff. And she kind of helped me unpack it. As far as a marriage goes, there are many, many lessons. I would say I have learned that agreement and commitment are not the same thing. I think when people say they're looking for their person, their soulmate, they expect that person will check every box and fit into every vision or the pictures they have for it, when the reality is like you make it work, right? You make the picture work. You make every aspect of your relationship work out in the end, because nobody is perfect. And that's sort of the goal, right? The whole thing is like you're making it perfect for each other because you're both damaged individuals helping each other figure out your shit, right? And I think that getting to the other side of thinking that you have to agree on everything versus you can be committed to the goals of having a healthy, happy relationship and raising your kids the right way, and that the ideals of what you want can be the main North Star driving you, even if you know that the roads are going to be bumpy and you might have disagreements along the way on how to get to those goals. I guess that's what I would say. And I think a lot of young relationships struggle with clarifying that. They want everything to be perfect or they don't want to play. And in reality, that's just not how it works, Yeah, I didn't expect to come with life lessons of my marriage off the top of my head, but I'm gonna think more about that one for next time. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful in terms of at least being honest that like it wasn't easy, and she gave me a lot to think about in terms of the damage I had brought into the relationship, wrapped up around this thought that I had failed spiritually, which just wasn't true. And giving me a new sense of why in my life is what she and my kids are. Like they're the reason I exist and I find purpose every day, and like and serving them, and really I think anything we do as far as how we find purpose should be based on the why we do it, the service it brings to others. Because whether you're a lawyer or a chess player or whatever, the thing you do is less relevant than the why you do it. And I think that she really gave me that perspective, and changed my whole kind of way of how I felt about myself.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very helpful to hear that. I'm even reading the book because you guys got together really young. Like, how often does a relationship last, or people to get together so young, especially in your situation, what you were going through? And so to like persevere and to stay committed, like, you don't see that as often, especially in today's day and age where you talk about attention, like people are distracted all the time. What's the new shiny thing, as opposed to sticking with something and making it work? So yeah, much respect there. And I'm sure it wasn't easy, but
Yep.
here you are now.
Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people just they confuse like compromise for like resignation, meaning like at the same time, like you should never resign to the parts of your partner that one aren't good for themselves, let alone like maybe good for you. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of marriages, you start to like use the label of compromise. All right, if she doesn't mess with me on this stuff, I won't mess with her on this stuff. And so now you're seeking satisfaction, stimulation outside of your marriage in the same way that she is. And you sort of are growing apart in terms of what's filling your cup. And you use this term, we compromise for what each other wants versus like really challenging each other on the damage you brought in. I mean, she brought in a ton of damage from her life, and I brought in a ton of damage from mine, and creating the space, seeing it as your glory to be the person who helps someone heal something that doesn't belong to you. Meaning, I think a lot of relationships, so now I'm thinking of what I've learned. Here's what I would say. My wife and I have learned something really important, which is that a lot of marriages stay stuck and like your anger with your daddy issues belongs with them. Instead of seeing that it's your glory and your opportunity to be the most important person in this person's life because you allow them to work out something that actually isn't your fault. You allow them to bring it up and to talk about it and to share the parts of their life where they're like projecting the shit that doesn't belong to you, and you create the space to sort of heal that for them, even if it wasn't your fault. I think that I had a lot of issues in my life with my mom. I had a lot of issues with women and my anger and heartache over not being protected to some degree. And I think I brought a lot of like initial sort of projection and misogyny and anger toward women and motherhood because of my own heartache and experience, right? And so her ability to kind of create space and in fact push me to bring that up and to poke and to prod and to bring my pain to the table was like a service we provided for each other back and forth. And I think, again, there's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't want the type of marriage that really isn't just healthy and monogamous and faithful and full of love, not just saying those things, but actually is those things. A lot of people say it and it's not true, right? But if you really want those things, it comes with an expectation of the level of truth and the level of, space and the level of compassion you bring for the other person's truth and damage as well. You get what I'm saying? And so you kind of have to create the space for the real things to come out and see it as your opportunity to be there for the other person, even if, that issue isn't totally your fault. It's been great for her to help me deal with my issues and for me to help her deal with hers. And I think that's one of the things that has really made our marriage strong with time is we no longer scorecard or keep track in a way where like, if my wife is hurt and angry and frustrated about something, I'm not saying sometimes it isn't my fault. We work through our stuff and you deal with each other and you listen and you try to, you try to be the best version of yourself you can. But sometimes the deep issues that someone brings aren't your fault. And rather than shutting that down, you create the space for them to work it out with you. And that only makes you closer in the end, right? So that's the thing that I think we really had to do for each other with time, because we were basically super damaged, traumatized kids who barely made their marriage work as a cult fell apart around them. And both of our moms died super young. So we didn't really have a lot of other options but to kind of work out some of this really deep stuff with each other. And, in the end, I guess that's paid off. But you've got me thinking now. I gotta think of more stuff that I'm, because we did make it work, and I need to think about how to talk about it.
I appreciate you being real, man. I just appreciate it. Like, again, I'm fresh off reading your book. I still have 30 pages left. I have to admit, 30 pages. But yeah, just great to hear your story. Great to connect with you personally. I know our audience is going to really appreciate this. I don't know, Joel, if you have any other questions you want.
I got a couple trivial questions before we wrap this up. Who is your favorite chess player of all time?
Alexander Aljohin, Alekhine, the American enunciation of the spelling. He was the 4th world champion after Jose Raul Capablanca, but he is in many ways the first real super grandmaster, meaning chess for the early part was sort of defined as like, this guy's style is positional, this guy's style is tactical and overly aggressive. But modern chess is about playing everything. The best chess players in the world understand that you don't play the position, you let the position play you. And he was the first one to like really emulate like high level holistic approach to the game. He could beat you in a brilliant checkmating attack or beat you in a long drawn out endgame. Not to say that there weren't brilliant chess players before him, but to me, Alexander Alekhine Aljohin was kind of the godfather of like how modern chess is played, which has to be fluid and objective and holistic. So that's my very specific answer.
I love it.
Not one of the big names that people would think of in the modern era, but that's my favorite.
No, I love it. Do you have a favorite chess piece and why?
Not really. I think I have a love-hate relationship with the knight because the knight is the trickiest piece, and some of the tactics that occur with a knight are beautiful and really fulfilling, and they speak to like the is chess science or art. But the knight is a very tricky piece, but also when you get forked, which is where a knight attacks two pieces at once, and it's like often a blunder, it's like the worst thing in the world. So the love-hate relationship with the knight is very real. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Cool,
Well, the
man.
knight also has like the most peculiar movements compared to
Yeah,
everything
exactly.
else. Because it's like, oh, straight forward, diagonal, but it's like, okay, a little bit forward, to the right, to the left. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
The knight gives chess a lot of its geometrical beauty in some ways, because otherwise it's really a game of like horizontal, diagonal straight lines. But the knight dynamic creates all kinds of just difficulties. It's often knight tactics like forks and sort of tricky maneuvers with the knight are some of the hardest things for people to anticipate, even at the highest level. Like, even at the highest level of chess these days. In fact, you'll hear us commentate it. We're doing like the World Bullet Chess Championship. Bullet chess is only 1 minute per side, so you've got the fastest players in the world with only 1 minute total. Like, it's just lightning speed. And you'll hear the commentators when there's like a trade dynamic where someone gets the knight, the other guy gets like the bishop or the rook or something. They'll be like, "Oh my God, he's got a knight! Like, this is so hard for the other guy to anticipate." Because in bullet chess, the knight is just so tricky in terms of its ability to create traps and just like literally like pitfalls. That the knight is such a dynamic advantage because it's just harder for the brain to compute at even at the highest levels, like the quick tactics and just all kinds of stuff.
So in bullet chess, it's 1 total minute per player for the entire game. And then if like you run out of time, is it like you lose, or how does that
you lose? Yeah.
lose?
Wow.
Okay. Because
Amazing.
I've never played chess with a clock. Even in my teens when I played, you just sat down and you played. And so like there's these like blitz is a different style, and then freestyle. Like I haven't even delved into like the differences of the game, but it's fascinating.
Denny,
Wait,
man.
after this, real quickly, what's your
Yeah, go.
favorite style to play? So, and then how many styles are there?
Yeah, for me personally, like I still love just playing like classical chess, which is the slower chess. I think that chess is a hard game, and I think that the dopamine you earn by playing a good chess game is really healthy dopamine. This isn't like Candy Crush, stuff here, right? And so to me, like personally playing a game that that takes a couple hours where you're really in a mentally grueling arm wrestling match with someone is the best chess. But I think as a fan, I like watching fast chess, like blitz chess, more than anything else. I think when I'm observing as a spectator, there's just no denying that seeing the best players in the world make hundreds of moves in just a couple minutes and be on the edge of your seat. The Speed Chess Championship, for example, is our biggest event. We just held it in London last weekend. I just got back, and Magnus Carlsen won again. He tends to win a lot of chess events. I think Magnus Carlsen is the greatest player of all time, mostly because of his ability to dominate across every discipline. To your question, Magnus is the best in classical, the best in rapid, which is a little faster, the best in blitz, a little faster, and probably the best in bullet. Maybe not so much anymore. There are some younger, faster players who've kind of overtaken him there. But Magnus is undeniably the most dominant world champion in history across every one of those disciplines. And chess is very much like, I guess it's like running in that way, that like you don't ask Usain Bolt to be the best marathon runner. You don't ask the marathon runner to be Usain Bolt in like a 100-yard dash, right? But Magnus is somehow the best in like all of them, right? And so that's pretty special to see. We're living in an era where I don't know if we'll ever see someone like him again. I guess we probably will, because that tends to be what happens with evolution. But he's pretty special.
Yeah.
So the general consensus is that Carlsen has like superseded Kasparov as with that title, the GOAT title.
Yes, there's a bit of like a Jordan LeBron debate
Yeah.
in terms of who the GOAT is, and it is as you know, it's hard to compare eras because until we have a time machine, we don't really necessarily know. But we have our own way to measure this, which is that Kasparov's dominance against his peers is undeniably like incredible, and there's a reason that dominance puts him in the conversation with Magnus. But Magnus's dominance over this era is just as much. And by our measurement at chess.com, where we have invested very heavily in the data side of the game, partly because of anti-cheating measures, we're very much on the front line of making sure that no humans are ever using computers illegally during a real game, which takes a lot to sort of tease out the data and find the patterns of inhuman play, I'll say. So there's a lot that goes into our secret sauce. But one of the benchmarks we have used to establish the secret sauce is really analyzing the DNA of all the greatest players in history. And what I can say, without getting into more of what that algorithm looks like, is that Magnus compared to chess perfection, meaning ignore the results, result blind, because there's an argument that results are subjective in and of themselves. The ratings of your opponents can also be based on the era, and that's where it can get confusing. But when you compare the quality of Magnus's moves to like the best computers in terms of how they have looked at all the games in history, Magnus Carlsen is the most accurate chess player to have ever lived. He makes the least amount of mistakes compared to like chess perfection.
Wow.
And what's fascinating on this is we've done this study, and you'll love this, is that by this measurement, chess.com's measurement of who the GOAT is, Magnus is number 1. Gary is number 2, which is already giving a great nod to Gary, because there was a world champion in between Magnus and Gary, which was Vishwanathan Anand, who's also great. So I'm not taking anything away from Vishy. I love him. Anand is the Indian world champion and literally gave birth to like the India chess revolution now that's happening. But it goes Magnus, Gary was according to this better than Anand, and then it drops to Fischer, the American Bobby Fischer, which says a lot for Bobby Fischer in terms of his just pure talent, because there were multiple world champions in between Fischer and Kasparov and Magnus. So for Fischer to have been that good and that dominant, it's I don't know what it is. It's like trying to get someone like Wilt Chamberlain in the thing.
Yeah.
Like, he was so dominant and so talented that's where the time machine conversation gets interesting, because what if Fischer had the same resources and the same knowledge that Magnus has now, right? So those are the discussions that are fascinating, because talent is different than greatness. I think Magnus is undeniably the greatest chess player ever by our measurement, and I think it's a good measurement. But talent is something that is very difficult to put your finger on.
Yeah, and the players back then, they didn't have the technology that I think is helping educate, I think, players these days too. Like, they're seeing the perfection of, let's say, these engines, and then it's like there's a lot more to analyze and to play against and to learn. So it's almost, you're always standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yep.
To some degree, and it's interesting to see how things evolve. But
But
100%.
Jordan's the GOAT.
Did you? Okay. Well, my kids would disagree with you. My kids would say LeBron's the GOAT, So there you go. And
dude, that's a whole other cover. I love both of them. Both of them. It's tough to argue with like the 6-0, 6 MVPs, but like the longevity of LeBron, it's we can have a whole another podcast.
It's a whole podcast, and my boys, walk around debating all the time, and they, I love that I lived both, so I always can play the card. Like, if you guys had seen Jordan, you wouldn't deny his greatness. Like, you just have no idea what you're talking about. And at the same time, obviously LeBron is a pretty special athlete. And I understand arguments both ways. Yeah. So and then you got
to throw Kobe in there too.
You got to throw some.
We might have to.
I think the person who always gets overlooked is Duncan. Because Tim Duncan has 5 rings, and he played against the Kobe Shaq era, and he played against, toward the end it was toward LeBron and others, but like Tim Duncan is also like very quickly overlooked as like a guy who should be in the discussion as well. So there you go.
Dude, I love watching him play. Listen, we might have to have you on again in the future just to have an all-round chat.
Let's do it. Let's do chess basketball, man.
Denny, man, thank you so much for your time, your openness, your vulnerability, and like, dude, the depth and the complexity and of the life that you've lived, and all that you've lived through, like, for what it's worth, where it's led you to the man that you are today, for what you've created, for what you advocate for who you are, man. Like, what an incredible fucking journey, and just blessed to have this conversation and blessed to connect with you. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you. You're awesome.
Yeah,
dude.
Well,
I guess in closing, like chess.com, obviously, Well, how would you like to direct our audience? You got the book, you got the business. Where would you like to lead them at this point in time?
And I'm not just saying this because no one likes opening up their coat and being like, let me sell you my own watches. I'm not going to do
This is
that.
the time, Bez. This is the
I think
invitation.
you guys have a diamond membership waiting for you. I can't give all of your audience a free diamond membership.
all
But you
good.
should sign up to chess.com. And I would say the thing we're very proud of with chess.com is obviously there's a lot that's happened in growth of the game and how we feel we've invested in making it more accessible, more fun, more diverse. Just chess is not the game you thought it was. And it is a lot of fun to play on the phone. But our North Star has always been like, why did I lose that chess game? Why did I lose that game? How did that happen? We are not a company that is, data farming your information. We are not an advertising driving a high CPM company. Our whole business is getting people to ask a question, how do I get better at chess? And so we feel very good about that. And I think that chess generally is a game that is good for human beings. I think that chess makes people smarter and smarter people make the world a better place. So from my perspective, I feel very fortunate that chess.com's mission is an infinite one, right? I mean, I think that chess makes people better and better human beings are better for the world. So there's a lot of things about chess that I think are good for you. There's been studies that show it's the best game for, improving cognitive development in kids. There's been studies that show it fights off memory loss. So I'm not here to even sell chess.com. Just the game of chess, I think, is good for human beings. And I'm in a very lucky position, like I said, that the business mission was infinite long before Simon Sinek was using that term, right? We were really in a great spot because chess is just so good for the world. So that's my chess pitch. And my book is, I will say this, like, I didn't intend to tell my story to close the chapter. I was starting a new one, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this, not out of any anger or blame, or as you've heard me say, even really anything but to give some interesting clarity about how these things happen and what we can choose to do when we're faced with these types of obstacles, right? And so my book is ultimately, hopefully, like any of the other great stories we want to hear, which is a bit of a story of alchemy, right? We all want to believe we're the hero of our own story, that we can transform our hardship into something magical. But no one likes to say the obstacle is the way when they're in the middle of the shit, right? You like to say that after, right? And so to me, I'm trying to share a story of hey, we can do some hard things. And so that's my pitch on the book of why I did this. And you don't have to buy it. You probably should. But that's
Listen,
that's
I've read a lot of books in my life. I think people should read the book. I think also too, man, we're living in a world where there are a lot of wounded, damaged people wounding and damaging other people. And to say oh, you were in the only cult that ever existed. No, it happens all the time in different ways. And so the more people get eyes on something, the more people read something and see the behaviors at play, then they can kind of tune inwards, hopefully from self-reflection, see how maybe some of these patterns are playing out in their lives or in their relationships or the groups they're part of. And so it's so educational, it's inspiring, and it's a fun book too to read, because it's just your story, the chess, the history of chess, where you were and where you've come. It's a powerful read, man. And I'm just grateful that you read it, and I'm grateful that Mark connected us. And yeah, man.
Yeah, shout out to Mark, by the way. Yeah, shout out to you, Mark Over. We love you.
Shout out to the great Mark
guys.
Over. He was actually the episode just before you. All right, man. We've said enough here. Appreciate you, everyone else. Thank you for listening. Take care, y'all. Man, these conversations that we continue to have on this platform are just so amazing. I love the diversity of what we're doing. I love how diving into the heart of a human being's story is always central and has always been central since the very beginning, because, man, there is deep lessons and learnings that can be taken from every single human being, that sits in that virtual seat opposite us as we hold these conversations. And I know the audience appreciates it as well, just the depth and the sincerity of the people that, enter into the space. It's so profound.
Yeah, it is. He used the term too, alchemy, alchemize.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how do we alchemize the experiences that we've had, and grow in the ways that we grow. And really, his story definitely embodies, what we're about. And episodes 1 and 2, walking the authentic path. What does that journey look like for each individual? and how do you learn from the obstacles and the trials and the tribulations, and step into your path and live your purpose and connect in such a deep way. And yeah, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I don't have more words except that it was a gift to hear his story, and obviously a pleasure to read his book.
Totally, man.
And excited to see how the game of chess unfolds in the coming decades.
For sure. It's not that black and white. Guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here. We love you, appreciate you. Hereforthetruth.com is the home of not just our podcast, but our offerings, including our membership community, and what is, in my opinion, one of the most grounded, effective, psycho-spiritual programs that are out there to really upgrade and up-level your life, which is our signature program, which in many ways is the missing education that many of us did not get, and that's called Rise Above the Herd. And this is a self-study program, which you can go about on your own terms anytime you choose to start. So hereforthetruth.com to discover all of that. Please, if you can, follow, like, subscribe, wherever you're listening. Help us grow, help us get these messages and these stories out there. Lots of love. See you soon.